Our anime begins looking like a typical American breakup, with the woman stabbing the boy multiple times in the stomach. The guy was chilling, taking a lot of stabs while staring at the moon, and he says his name was Tomoku and Kanata, but his name didn't matter anymore. He says the only thing that mattered was that he truly died that day suddenly. Then he opens his eyes and it's day 1, and when he does, he sees an old goblin in front of him. The man gets very confused, wondering where he was and why that old guy was looking at him, and who that green old guy was. Then the goblin says he's going to call the big guy next to our MC Gob Kishi, and looking at our MC, the old guy says he'll call him Gobro. Just as the mech is about to complain about his name, the old man puts a gross insect inside the guy's mouth. The mech couldn't do anything because he said he was very sleepy. So we arrive at day 2, and the mech says that when he woke up on day 2, he realized he was surrounded by green and ugly babies, but the plot twist is that he also realized he was one of them, and that's how he realized he really died and was reborn as a goblin. Upon realizing this, he started crying like a real baby. Then we move on to day 3, and he realizes that goblins grow too fast because he was already big, and after a good night's sleep, his body grew a lot. He says it didn't matter where he was or who he was. What mattered was that he got a second chance at life, and he says he will survive with all his might. Then we move on to the 4th day, and that old guy appears again with a pot full of insects, disgusting creatures, man, and the old guy says this is the last food they'll receive from him, and from now on they'll have to get their own food. After they fill their bellies, the big guy goes out, and not only him but Gob Kishi too, and he looks up at the sky and notices several scary birds there, also plants he had never seen in his life. So he realizes that this was really a different world from the one he knew. So the mech turns to Gob Kish and calls him by his name. However, Gob Kish wondered where he got that name from, but the mech ended up introducing himself as Gobo. And so, after a few days, the mech teamed up with this Gob Kish since he was the biggest boy among the goblins. He did all this with only one intention, which was to help the mech hunt since the dude isn't dumb or anything, right? So they start hunting a horned rabbit and manage to catch it. However, Gob Kish almost ate the rabbit alone, but Gobo starts hitting the poor guy, saying it was to share with him. And once the mech taught the guy how to share, he ended up taking the rabbit's horn to see if he could make a weapon out of it. Suddenly, in his vision, some phrases appeared saying something like, Gob obtained a small creature horn, and he gets confused, asking what appeared on his face. But before he could even figure it out properly, the other guy was already drooling behind him, wanting to eat that rabbit. So they both start dividing the rabbit's meat and eating, and Gob Kish was so happy, man, that he was eating and crying, thanking Gobo. So we arrive at day 5, and they were already hunting with much sharper synchronization. And as Gobo takes a horn from that rabbit, another message appears, saying he obtained a medium creature horn. Again, he wonders what that was about, but Gob Kish wonders what he was talking about. He says it was nothing and tells them to go eat. And as he was eating, a message appears saying evasion, and at that moment, Gobo realizes something. He remembers his past life. In his past life, he had an ability called absorption, which was a very rare ability he was born with in his old world. Basically, with this ability, he could eat anything iron, gold, or even poison, and had a chance to acquire the characteristics of whatever he ate. He says, unfortunately, it seems he lost all the other abilities he had in his past life. But he considers himself lucky to have obtained this unique ability in this life as well, since many monsters were lurking in that new world. So we arrive at the 6th day, where a goblin girl appears in front of Gobo and Gob Kish, impressed that they were eating horned rabbits. She introduces herself as Gob Miai and mentions that a boy died yesterday after being gored by one of these rabbits. She then gets close to our MC, cheeks all red, asking if he was Gobo and saying he was really amazing. She also starts praising him excessively, saying he was intelligent, handsome, and very strong. Gob Kish wonders, but what about me? What am I? And without even looking at him, she says he's just normal. Poor Gob Kish, right? And Armik wastes no time, asking if Gob Miai wants to hunt with them tomorrow. Gob-mi is so happy with the invitation that she jumps on him, hugs him, and says she will. So we reach the 7th day, and they couldn't hunt because it was raining too much, so they postponed the hunt with Gob-mi for tomorrow. The Mick decides to see what they had stored since he was planning to make a new weapon. When he opens the storage, he is surprised. But the scene changes, and he was smashing a mysterious crystal with a stone. He says that when he entered the storage to find things to make weapons, he found a group of human women imprisoned, and he quickly realized why they were there, but he preferred not to think about it. Suddenly, the old goblin appears, saying he was very motivated. The Mick says that guy was Gobig, the one who held him when he reincarnated, and gave him the random name Gobiru. He was the oldest in that cave, and the old man says he could level up faster than expected. The Mick wonders what level he was talking about, and the old man teaches him how to check his level. When the Mick imitates the old man, he realizes he's level 86, and the old man says if he reaches level 100, he can evolve into a more advanced form. Despite this, he still looks like a goblin. Among dozens, the Mick says goblins grow very fast, and that old, frail guy was only in his 20s. Man, so if I were a goblin, I'd be like that old guy. The old man says the young ones from the village should be back soon. With that, our mech will come as what's called a ruby goblin evolved, and he was eager to see what kind of prey they would bring this time. After saying this, the old man starts laughing wickedly and walks away. So we reach the 8th day. And the three of them were hunting in perfect synchronization, with Gob-mi providing long-range support, Gobo at medium distance, and Gob-kish as the group's attacker. This formation was working perfectly for them, and when Gob-mi eats that meat, she starts crying, saying she hadn't eaten anything but fruits until now. When Armik eats that meat, he learns a new ability called thermography. He also gains poison resistance, poison perception, and a bad eye. He starts smiling, saying that snakes seem to have a higher level than his. Gob-kish then asks if he could eat the snake's head, but the Mick says no, as it was too poisonous, and if they both ate it, they would surely die. The Mick then thinks that no matter how ugly he looked in this world, he would survive since this was his second chance at life. On the 9th and 10th days, they prepared all the equipment and went on a usual hunt. Then, on the 11th day, they made a mistake by exploring a cave out of curiosity, the kind of character that dies first in horror movies. They were attacked by numerous bats, but using Gob-kish's shield and Gobo's bad eye, they managed to defeat some of the bats. The scene changes, and they were already eating the meat of those bats. Armik learned echolocation, vampirism, and vampire skills. However, some goblins were watching them eating various types of meat, and they were very hungry. So we reached the 12th day at night. When they were all sleeping, some goblins ended up attacking Gobo while he was asleep, all of them armed with sticks. But he had his perception skill activated all the time. So Gobo wakes up and beats up all those goblins, and one of them couldn't take it and died right there. The Mick says it happened so fast that he didn't adjust his poison skill properly. Iso Deksu to do's os outrose goblins choke. When the Mick says they all need to learn a lesson too, Gom appears behind him with a very scary aura and starts beating them up, almost killing them. The Mick even tells her to take it easy on them. So, we move on to the 13th day, and it shows that they managed to kill a humanoid pig with a little difficulty, but the Mick was still shocked by the previous night's attack. So, he ends up receiving a new skill, libido, and also orc language detection and analysis. He then asks the other two if they were full, and they say they are. The Mick says they'll carry all that meat back to the cave. When they get there, he throws a bunch of meat around those goblins, telling them to eat. They are hesitant at first, asking if they could really eat, and the Mick assures them they can, that's why he brought it. So, they all start eating happily. The Mick thinks in his previous world, he would never help the helpless like this, and maybe it's not just his appearance that changed, but also him inside. While our protagonist sleeps, a notification emerges, announcing that level thresholds have been surpassed, triggering special instinctual conditions for domination and distinct movement. A window appears asking if he wants to evolve, yes or no. He's so sleepy that he just chooses yes and goes back to sleep without thinking twice since he didn't understand anything. It says Gobo received the blessing of the great god of conclusion and origin. So, on the 14th day, when Gobo wakes up, he realizes his body has completely changed, and he looks a bit more humanoid, resembling his past life. But not only he has undergone this change, but also Gob-Kish, the old guy. He's impressed that both of them have already evolved, and they weren't even born a month ago. Gob-Kish says he wants to test his strength, but he wants to test it by fighting Gobo. So they start fighting, and the exchange is very intense and balanced for a long time. But Gobo says Gob-Kish is too slow and ends up knocking him down. Gob-Kish then says Gobo was very strong, but Gobo claims Gob-Kish had much more strength than him. Suddenly, Gobir notices something coming very fast towards them. The scene changes, and there were many giant wolves hunting those horned rabbits, not even sparing the poor doer who got caught up in it. Gobo then says they were perfect enemies to test their skills against, and the three of them start fighting all those wolves. However, they manage to defeat them all, even the leader. Gobo starts devouring the meat of that leader and gains a new ability called Wild Hunt. He also learns leather armor and command skills, so they take the wolves' bodies back to the cave. But Gob says that everything they eat, they have to return in the same amount. The goblins kneel and ask him to teach them the tricks of killing. After thinking it over, Gob agrees to train them all. Everyone is very happy, and Gobo finally decides what he will do in that world. To continue getting stronger. We begin the second episode on the 17th day with Goboru asking Gobjai to wake up, because something terrible had happened. Unfortunately, all the human women in that place had left in the most tragic way possible, perhaps because they had lost hope, and so the boy joins Gobjai and holds a silent funeral for them while they cremate them. A few days passed, and soon we were on our 26th day with Gabu running around with other goblins who were being trained by Goboru, who was of the same generation as him. And in the meantime he took the opportunity to eat promising enemies he came across in order to learn new skills. Gobjai was a little worried at first, and while Goboru was already preparing to attack them, Gobjai explained to Goboru that they were actually from the same group as him, the Incursion group, who are basically the parents of Goboru's generation. And then they start exchanging a lot of ideas while leaving young human girls tied up on the ground, and we can see that the problem with goblins and humans is quite serious. After all, the goblins at all times seem to be Machiavellian with the humans, with one approaching and saying that they seemed so healthy and that they arrived at a good time because they lost the previous batch. Goboru thinks that the goblins' DNA is so strong that mating with other species still leads to the birth of goblins. He understood the instinct to reproduce, but he didn't want anything bad to happen to those young human girls. He really didn't feel good about it, and seeing that the other goblins are a bit weird towards them. Goboru decides to ask if it's okay for him to look after them, and the goblin doesn't like the question at all and grabs him by the collar of his shirt, asking him who he thinks he is, and says that he's just a brat who's just been born. And at that, some goblins get apprehensive seeing that and start to get into battle position, and the old man Gobjai sees all that in a cold sweat. Poor guy. And suddenly, two goblin girls arrive telling the two of them to calm down, because they didn't want to end up in the middle of this internal fight, and Goboru asks Gobjai who those two girls are, and Gobjai answers him by saying that they are Hobsato and Hobse, and one of them asks if they wouldn't like a duel between the leaders of each generation so that the winner can decide what the village will do from now on, but the duel would be without the use of weapons. And the bigger goblin says, "That's fine with me, this kid needs to learn a lesson." And Goboru says he has nothing against it either, and they both end up agreeing to the goblin's proposal. After everything has been decided, Goboru beats the crap out of the other goblin, teaching him a lesson, and even trapping him with a kind of web that comes out of his finger that he has learned to produce thanks to the daimonic spider. And then Goboru asks, "This officially makes me the leader of this village. Anyone want to complain?" And no one says a word. And then he puts the young human girls in a locked room, saying that he had already made it clear to everyone that they shouldn't lay a hand on them, and that he didn't intend to do anything either and would just look after them, and said that one day he would return them to a human town. And one of them asks him, "But then what do we have to do for you?" And clearly he was thinking, "I saved them, and there was an interest of mine in that." And that was their human knowledge. They were part of a group of merchants who ended up being attacked by goblins during their journey through Goblin country, and all the men were killed and the 5 were the only survivors. They all start crying and he leaves. On the 28th day, one of the girls says good morning as he goes to deliver food, and he thinks to himself, it's not that they've gotten over everything that's happened, but that they've accepted that it's better to face everything in a positive way. He cooked for them with ingredients and utensils that were among the spoils. You need to eat to live, and good food can be like a medicine to cure your mental state. Humans don't evolve like goblins, so they end up perfecting something to have an occupation. In that group of 5 girls, the quiet girl is an appraiser and blacksmith. The twins are from the kitchen and tailoring, and the girl with glasses is an alchemist. While the brave redhead who greeted him in the morning could be a novice warrior, but she wouldn't be much help now. Later Goblin would make her take part in the training, saying that age didn't matter, and from now on, it would depend on their strength, ordering them to do push-ups. But some of them can't take it anymore, and Goblin asks, "What, did you only survive until today because you were lucky?" Instead of sending them out to hunt, Goblin sent them out to do group exercises and also to teach them the rules he had set. We arrived on the 31st day. It was raining a lot, and Goblin and Gubkichi were having a very serious training duel. Goblin was enjoying Gubkichi's performance, who at that moment was asking his leader to come up, and the leader was saying, "That's how it should be." And all the other Globins were joining in, watching the leader and one of the members practicing together. After training, something happened that night. Goblin was lying in his bed until he decided to get up. The goblins came to where the 5 humans were, but Goblin attacked them all and tied them up. And when he heard some nonsense from one of them, he hit him again, went towards the girls and apologized to them for making them afraid, and the redhead began to cry and hugged him. But at that very moment other goblins arrived worried because they heard the noise and asked what had happened. And Goblin said that they had arrived at the right time, and that Gubkichi could drag those other goblins out of there. And then he asked Gobmi to wake up the others and gather everyone together, saying that they needed to see what he was about to do. Everyone was standing outside in the rain, just watching Goblin torture those who didn't obey his rules, and then Goblin asked, "Now you understand the rules of our village, right, everyone?" And everyone nods in fright. And then he dismisses everyone, and in the end, all those who broke the rules ended up being beaten to death, including the one who received the worst punishment, Hobkin, who died the next morning. We arrive at the 32nd day and see the goblins shooting at a tricorn that has very resistant scales. It doesn't like being attacked very much and tries to fight back. But the Goblin unleashes its webs through its fingers to hold the animal down. Gubkichi then went to the tricorn to attack it together with Goblin. They ended up killing it. Goblin thought it was a difficult opponent, and they used its flesh to feed themselves, and by eating the tricorn's flesh, Goblin learned the following skills: Escamati horse neigh, accelerated healing, kick proficiency, improved charge, and triple stomp. And then he decides to test these skills and is very impressed with the triple stomp, as it is a single blow that causes 3 impacts, and for Goblin this was proof of what a difficult opponent the tricorn horse was. Next, we see Goblin lying in his bed, when suddenly the red-haired girl lies in the same bed as him, and he thinks that last night must have been very scary for her, so she covers up by letting her stay the night with him. On the 33rd day, Goblin wakes up. He notices that the Gobmi have joined them on the opposite side. They used his arm as a pillow, and so he was in a lot of pain. Then the goblins are impressed that the Gobu who was carrying the goblins' equipment has suddenly evolved into a hobgoblin, just like the level they were on, and training was going well. Gubkichi was the captain of the heavy protection warriors, and Gobmi commanded the long-range attack unit. Hobesato dealt with the mobility and light protection group. Gabu took over the rear support that prioritizes diverse tasks. Hobse is the only mage in the village. She was going to act as captain of our magical force, but so far there is no one else but her. Goburu decided that day to leave the training in the hands of the captains, while he went deeper into the forest to eat a variety of prey. On the way, he came across another tricorn and thought it was worth the risk, so he unleashed a skill to kill the tricorn and ended up ripping its head off. After defeating the tricorn, he thinks he might have gotten a bit arrogant after using attack magic for the first time. After that, he heads north into the forest and ends up going far away, until he sees a gigantic trail of blood, and then he remembers a goblin telling all the children like him at the time never to enter the northern forests. Deep down there lived a huge scarlet creature called a red bear, and he was right where that goblin had told him not to go, and he followed the trail of blood to see what it was, and it was a tricorn, and he was worried because the tricorn's armor is extremely resistant, and yet the horse was killed, when suddenly a gigantic creature appeared, and to Goburu's misfortune, it was the red bear that he had been told to avoid. Anyone with common sense would have run, but he had a plan to take down that huge creature, because he wanted to win and eat the meat to get more skills, and he goes towards the creature unleashing a skill with everything he has to take it down. We see Gobmi looking at nothing, and a goblin asks her what happened, and Gobmi replies worried because Goburu hasn't come back yet, so they decide to ask other goblins if they've seen him around. Gobkichi says he hasn't seen him, because he was training all the time. Then she asked the purple-haired goblin if she had seen him, and she said that she didn't know where he was, but she also said that Goburu is very strong, and that there was no reason to worry. Then she asked a magician who had spent the whole day reading a book on magic and hadn't seen Goburu either. Meanwhile, Goburu was fighting the red bear, and the bear, in order to defend itself against the magic cast by Goburu, sacrificed its arm, which left Goburu stunned. The bear is so strong that it seems easy to uproot a tree. Goburu is worried about being hit by its claws, as the armor he acquired by eating the tricorn probably wouldn't do much good. So he goes after the bear again and attacks it. But it doesn't do much good as the bear is extremely tough and ends up hitting him so hard that Goburu flies away. He gets very angry and throws a lot of web at the bear, which gets covered in web and quickly manages to get rid of it by throwing a giant fireball towards Goburu. And thanks to their battle, a fire starts in the forest, and the bear starts chasing Goburu through the dense forest, who is hiding while he heals himself with his own ability, thinking that he had never heard of a bear that spat fireballs in his past life, and then he decides to get back into the fight, because he really wants to defeat something that is feared by his fellow human beings, and so he runs towards the bear, which starts spitting fire at him, and he tries to resist the damage and even uses a shield made of water to get close to it, saying that it is resistant, but if it attacks him inside the mouth, and he hits him in the mouth. But it's not much use because the bear attacks him and sends him flying again, and this time he's badly wounded and spitting blood, but he thinks it's a draw because his blade was inside his mouth and he couldn't spit fire again. The bear doesn't even give a sign that he's going to fall, but Goburu would die with just one more attack from him, meaning Goburu is at an extreme disadvantage. But for him, that only makes the meal tastier. After he defeats that bear, the bear tries to attack him, but he dodges and counterattacks it, and he goes into combat with the bear again, and unfortunately the bear rips his arm off, and we arrive at the 34th day. Goburu is all wounded on the ground, with the bear's paw stuck in his body. He ended up winning. He takes the bear's paw and starts to eat it. In this, he receives the following skills: heavy damage and overwhelming strength. His level values have been exceeded. Now that the special conditions, Assassin of Champions, Conqueror's Stance, and God have been met, evolutionary advancement to Ogre Rare Species is available. And so he decided to make the evolution. If you want part 3 of this anime when it comes out, just comment on part 3 and leave lots of likes. Subscribe to the channel to support the videos. Until the next video. Our episode begins with all the goblins startled by Goburu's new appearance, as he had evolved when he defeated the Great Red Bear. With only a month of life, Goburou defeated the Lord of the Northern Forests and even evolved into an ogre. Goburou tried to avoid conversations, but it seemed futile as some members kept following him like a family of ducks. Goburou needed something new to wear, and when the human girls saw him, they were quite scared, but once they recognized him, everything was fine. Goburou tried to ignore what was around him, especially Gobmi, who was pinching his leg for some reason. Goburou handed an axe to the female blacksmith, and she told him she would take care of it, also mentioning she had crafted a knife with a spirit stone and would like him to take a look later. He found it quite interesting and thanked the girl by patting her head, making her a bit embarrassed. Suddenly, he got startled as Gobmi and the redhead were still pinching his leg. Then the blonde twins asked Goburou to find someone to help them because the workload was a bit heavy for just the two of them. So Goburou decided to arrange 3 female goblins from the logistics squad, and they thanked him. Goburou was impressed because despite humans being mortal enemies of goblins, those human girls had quickly adapted, which he found admirable. Next, Goburou said the 2 girls would make great wives, and if by chance they were interested in him. When he said this, they became a little shy, and he thought their smiles, which showed no displeasure, were also beautiful. Gobmi and the redhead were furious, slapping Goburou's head out of jealousy. To Goburou, he doesn't deserve the twins, and then he goes to the alchemist, as she had resumed preparing potions. The alchemist asks what he desired, and Goburou asks about the green liquid she was holding. She replied it was poison. Goburou asks how she intended to use it, and the alchemist responds it was for self-defense. Since she realized there are trustworthy goblins like Goburou, she gave up mixing it in Goburou's food. The alchemist explains it was just a small precaution. The alchemist is quite straightforward with Goburou, as he has developed so much that she doesn't know what to do anymore. Then Goburou lifts the alchemist off the ground, saying it's normal, and she asks him not to carry her anymore. Goburou starts laughing, thinking he likes the embarrassed laughter of the beautiful intellectual that is the alchemist. Suddenly, he feels vibrations at absolute zero, deadly glares coming from Gobmi and the redhead, who are dying of jealousy. In the end, Goburou needed several hours to cheer up the girls again. He ended up mentally exhausted more than physically. On the 36th day, Goburou couldn't participate in the mandatory hand-to-hand combat training at lunchtime. Goburou's normal punch, without much effort, almost killed the normal goblins. Even Gubkich's armor was almost broken, and Goburou saw no other way but to stop. He heals one of the goblins, apologizing for almost sending him beyond. Gubkichi doesn't feel well. Goburou asks if something happened, and Gubkichi responds that nothing happened and that he would go out to hunt. Goburou finds it suspicious because everything that had happened there to him was nothing. Next, Gobmi and Hubsato went hunting together. Gobmi feels she has a lot in common with Hubsato, and Hubsato agrees. And Gobu surrendered to his hobby, digging for spirit stones. The redhead devoted herself to training independently. Then Gobu tells Goburou that despite having his arm devoured by the beast, he was still very skilled. Goburou responds by saying that in the end, one simply gets used to everything, thanks to the slime he had eaten earlier. Goburou asks Gobu if she thinks everything is okay with Gubkichi. Gobu believes it will all depend on how much Gubkichi will exert himself from now on. Goburou agrees and asks her to return the book. Gobu ignores the request and starts reading the book again. Goburou says she's ignoring him and that he hasn't finished reading the book yet. That was one of the most relaxing days Goburou had had in a long time. Then, on the 37th day, Goburou was having lunch peacefully with the others after the end of the morning training when Gobu arrives desperately with a bloodied carbuncle to Goburou asking for help. Goburou uses his healing ability on her. Gobu explains that she was digging in the wall when the carbuncle fell. Goburou tells Gobu that the carbuncle has lost a lot of blood and he will ask the alchemist for a blood-forming reagent. The carbuncle wakes up not knowing where she is and asks who they are, thanking them for treating her even though she is a stranger. She introduces herself as Returner. She explains that she was recently being attacked by humans. Goboru knew that the precious gemstone on the carbuncles' foreheads is extremely valuable, and some people pay 1,000,000,000 gold coins for them. Goboru, analyzing all that, sensed a big problem coming. She was probably attacked by human adventurers precisely because of the precious gemstone. The carbuncle asks Goboru to drive the adventurers away because she doesn't have much time left. Goboru explains that Returner is an artificial carbuncle created by the legendary mage Velvet, and this carbuncle guards the secret treasure left by her master. The core that keeps her alive was severely damaged when she was attacked by humans. The said secret treasure probably has many legendary class items that Velvet accumulated during his lifetime. Returner says that her master hated humans, and before humans steal his treasure, she would prefer to hand it over to Goboru and his people. Goboru summons all the goblins to go after the said treasure. He also asks the blacksmith for the item she had mentioned before, which was the spirit stone knife. And then the blacksmith takes it out of the bag and hands it to Goboru. To Goboru, walking with that knife would seem much more savage than if he arrived empty-handed. It would serve as a discussion. The redhead becomes a little anxious, but Goboru already knew what she was thinking. He had no intention of killing those humans. Goboru's job was solely to drive them out, but if all else fails, he would have to use force. Then the goblins pass through the hole that Gobu accidentally dug, heading towards Velvet's secret treasure. Goboru will try to convince the adventurers alone, while Gobkichi and the others are hidden. Then the humans find him and attack Goboru, but he defends himself. And then Goboru says that they are inside someone's house, saying that they had invaded and were killing one resident after another, and now they wanted to take the treasure too, also saying that they had no salvation. The human adventurers don't understand how an ogre could speak the human language. Goboru says they are lucky because he was the nice type. Despite trying to dialogue, it doesn't help much because all the human adventurers advance to attack Goboru. Goboru manages to dodge the attacks and says that if the humans retreated now, he would let them escape. However, it doesn't help, they continue to attack. Goboru realizes they had quality items but relied too much on their level and didn't have that many skills. Until one of the mages hits him on the head with lightning. However, it has no effect on Goboru, who is now deeply irritated because he tried to talk to them, but they didn't even want to listen. Goboru unleashes an ability telling them not to take offense because they had exhausted his patience. And then the other goblins emerge to fight as well. The humans could already regret not listening to Goboru. The humans get a beating from the goblins, and then the goblins strip everything from the adventurers, divide it, and devour the humans. After eating the humans, Goboru learns the skills Assassin, Templar, Guardian Knight, Archmage, Priest, and Enchanter. The adventurers seem to be of high level in human terms. They also carried many valuable things that Goboru also devoured, learning the skills of hiding his own status and an item box. Goboru was very pleased with the magical chest, where he could store 99 pieces of up to 1,200 items. Goboru's part of the deal was fulfilled, and they go to the room that contains the treasures in the back. Returner thanks them, and Goboru sees Velvet sitting on his throne. She approaches Goboru and says that his time has come, and then she leaves, leaving the precious stone in Goboru's hands. Goboru devours the precious stone and acquires the Golden Rule skill. Gobkichi approaches Gobu and asks if she is okay, and she affirms that she is fine. The goblins offered a silent prayer for Returner and took all the gold in the magical chest, and there was still space. Goboru thought leaving Velvet like that would be dishonorable and decided to cremate him. However, when cremating him, a part of a legendary and extremely powerful armor for the arm falls off. Goboru shows his artifact that could be spun and transformed as he pleased and also produced poisons and threads. Then, after leaving Velvet's room, Goboru decides to have a feast to celebrate. We arrive on the 38th day, where Goboru evaluates the legendary items with the blacksmith, and then time passes and we arrive on the 39th day. Goboru distributes the magical items among the hobgoblins. He keeps the scarlet long spear, Galsigal Bay, and the magical bracelet Egaza. Thus, he would have kept 3 magical artifacts, including the silver arm which was of a legendary class. The legendary class is one of the categories of items, one of the highest indeed. In the afternoon, the group managed to gather ingredients for a bear stew. Everyone in Goburu's group managed to improve their level, which made the leader very excited. And then the twin sisters make the stew, which was very good. However, Goburu was thinking about what to do with the redhead, since she was not yet ready to fight. We arrive on the 40th day, where on that day a new leader would be chosen for the hobgoblins. Goburu even made a qualifying competition. Everyone improved their level considerably. Goburu thinks it would also be cool to create a mercenary group. We arrive on the 41st day, and Goburu goes out early for a walk and to track prey that he still didn't know. He managed to find a golden spider, devoured it, and gained the skills of producing golden threads, adamantine spider armor, and now he could even create accessories. A red deer with horns resembling rose quartz caught Goburu's attention, and then he devours it too. Goburu continues wandering through the forest when he comes across a magnificent tree under the sun. But he had gotten into trouble. That world had a species called dryads. Gobjai had told Goburu that they seduced males of intelligent species and then fed on them. There were only female dryads, and they truly had a charming beauty that no man could resist. When one of them appears in front of Goburu, who doesn't even look at her to avoid being seduced, he even sweats cold. But he can't resist, and after a while with her, Goburu acquires the ability Holly's Blessing. The Dryad tells Goburu it was wonderful and asks him to come back. He responds that if he were willing, he would come, and she says she would wait for him for her whole life. Goburu doesn't go into details, but for him, it was phenomenal. After walking a little further, Goburu discovers a lake with a waterfall. He decides to take a bath to wash off the sweat when he is surprised by lizardmen surrounding him. He attacks all of them and learns the aquatic skill and lizardman language. Next, Goburu sees a bull and uses his silver arm to defeat it. We arrive on the 42nd day, where they discovered that 2 goblins had everything to become mages. Goburu transferred them to Hobsei's squad without hesitation. Hobsei is happy to have apprentices, and Goburu gets chills from her smile. Next, Goburu learns the enchantment magic, which is a skill that alters matter. He tries to use it with the blacksmith, but she doesn't like it very much. We arrive on the 43rd day. Goburu says good morning to Gobmi, but she ignores him. Goburu is a little scared, thinking she is upset. Goburu didn't know the reason and then went to ask everyone, but no one knows the answer, and the redhead runs away. The twins who stay in the kitchen brought poisoned food, so Goburu goes to the alchemist. The alchemist says he tries to be present for everyone, but is slower than he seems. The alchemist simplifies it for him, saying they are jealous. Goburu doesn't understand, and the alchemist says the reason is his secret meeting with someone outside. And he still doesn't understand. The alchemist asks if he didn't notice, because he had several love bites on his neck. And he remembers the Dryad lady, that scary woman. Now everything is clear to Goburu, but he doesn't know what to do. The alchemist says she understands how the girls feel and kisses his cheek, saying that's what she feels, and she wanted to know if he accepts it, and Goburu can't believe what happened because he would never expect something like that from the alchemist. However, Goburu is happy and ended up getting into the mood. But Gobmi saw everything and asks if they lost their shame and didn't think she would forgive them. Then she runs to Goburu saying she also wants it. And the girls also say they don't want to be left behind. Goburu thinks it's better not to tell what happened next, but he gained several skills. If something happens, Goburu takes responsibility. Our episode begins with Goburu thinking that his perception skills are getting better and better. Now, if it was a species he had already seen, he would know its name and its strength. Something was coming towards him until he heard someone calling him. He said he heard it and was already on his way. Goburu goes outside with some goblins, and an elf tells him that he was too long. A mere goblin kept a noble elf waiting. He wanted to know why. Goburu thinks that his instincts tell him that those elves are going to cause a lot of trouble. The elf tells the goblins to be grateful to them because they came to the Globins and still call them a barbaric species. Goburu thinks he speaks in a very arrogant way. But to cut a long story short, the humans had their eye on the elves' secret treasure and were going to attack soon. The elves asked for help, saying that they would be rewarded accordingly. Old man Gobjai thought they would have enough food to feed the village for months, and it seemed like an offer they couldn't refuse. Gobaru listens to the old man talking and says that's what it sounds like. The elf says it's a deal, but Gobaru refuses. The elf was incredulous at the answer, and Gobaru said that they didn't care about the situation of the elves, and if they wanted to ask for something, they should show a little respect. The elf gets angry and goes to take the sword out of its sheath, but at that moment, Gobaru begins to glow in such a bizarre way that the elf starts to cry with fright and kneels on the ground. Gobaru grabs the elf by the neck and tells him that if he didn't want his head to fly that way, it would be good to tell the escort hiding in the bushes to lower their bows. Only at the same moment, an arrow goes into his face. He holds it with his teeth and breaks it in half. The elf asks everyone to leave their positions. Gobaru was rejecting the elf's request because he wasn't in the mood to help. But he was also a resident of the forest, so if humans showed up and wreaked havoc, he would gladly fight back. Then he throws his spear on the ground, which shatters several spears near the elven soldiers. Gobaru tells him not to ask how it works. If he hits Galsagal Bay on the ground, red spears are fired continuously in a radius of 100 meters. And then he lets go of the elf who runs off with his soldiers. Gobjai thinks it's a real waste. Gobaru thought that after that scare, they wouldn't be coming back anytime soon. If you don't want to be threatened by Gobaru, subscribe to the channel and you'll be exempt from any reprisals from this goblin. We've reached the 45th day. That day, Gobaru hunted down gray slimes deep in the forest, using a fire skill to destroy the slimes, about 20 of them. The skills that Gobaru learned from the core of the slimes were physical attack tolerance, his own stunt creator, and fluid replenishment reconstruction. Next, he makes a cut in his finger to drip some blood on a rock, and then he sees a replication of his own blood. That's what the stunt creator himself did. He could see himself, so they could share a field of vision, which gave him a good idea. We have reached the 46th day. Gobaru made party dresses for Gobmi and the others using the fabric soaked with the dub made from his blood. This meant that they could be used as a radio in emergencies. We've reached the 47th day. A blood double of Gobaru's is keeping watch as the elves walk through the forest. Gobaru's bad feeling was right. Those elves don't learn, they were there again. The elves arrive and are ready to attack. Gobaru, very angry, uses a wind skill on the elves. His breath is so strong that the elves can't move. Gobaru then uses his web ability on all the elves, leaving them all trapped. He takes them all to the Goblin cave and asks them why they came back. The elf replied that Gobaru's barbaric behavior had tarnished his pride, asking who Gobaru thought he was. He goes on to say that Gobaru deserved to die for his behavior. The elven soldiers said they tried to stop him, but he wouldn't listen. Gobaru replies that he has a suggestion. First, the elves should consider that this idiot leader of theirs is already dead. All the others can compete against Gobaru's people. Whoever won, he could guarantee that he wouldn't die. If they wanted to stay alive, they had to fight and win. And after the fight, 23 of the elves who took part, 6 of them lost. By the way, all 6 losers were men. But the secret is that he manipulated the formation of his opponents, as he didn't want to kill the beautiful women. Gobaru devoured the elves and acquired the skills Deep Woods Dweller, Elemental User, Knowledge of Archery, the art of tracking and hiding. Gobaru then asks the winning team to hand over their equipment and magic items. From now on, the team were his prisoners, and they were frustrated thinking that he was going to set them free. Gobaru says that they came to take lives, so he couldn't leave them free. Gobjai was happy because the elves were beautiful and the night would be long. Gobaru tells Gobjai not to touch them, and Gobjai just accepts. After all, he was the leader of the village. Gobjai was supposed to set a good example for the youngsters, but every now and then he felt like swinging his hips, and it was so rare that he would end up exploding. Gobaru says that if it's done in moderation, it's okay. Goboru then went to the leader of the elves, saying that he would think about how to execute him. The leader of the elves begs him to stop. We arrived on the 48th day. Gubkichi is defeating a giant bear. He had reached level 100. On the 49th day, the goblins are shocked by Gubkichi's appearance. Gobmi doesn't even recognize him. Goboru says she almost didn't. Gubkichi has developed absurdly. Goboru thinks that Gubkichi's development was not normal, but a variant. His skin had been burnt by the blessing of the demigod of fire, and his shiny skin, hard as steel, he said was because he had also received the blessing of the demigod of war. And then Gubkichi tells Goboru that since he had become an ogre, he hadn't had a worthy opponent, and he even thought he wouldn't be able to reach him. But now he could tell Goboru to fight him again. And then they will fight. Goboru and Gubkichi had a formidable fight, but Goboru won. When it came to fighting techniques, Goboru was still the best, but Goboru admits that Gubkichi really is his rival. Something had happened the night after he had exhausted himself in the competition. He saw a being apologizing and gave him a skill. Goboru wakes up again with Gobmi and the red-haired girl by his side and wonders what has happened. Gobu says he has an emergency. Gobu said he didn't know if they were inspired by the Gubkichi, but they had 4 new hobgoblins. The alchemist said that Goboru was late and said that she had already done the aptitude tests. One of those hobgoblins had potential, and the other had the potential to be a cleric. The goblin introduced himself, saying that his name was Gobdi, and that he would do his best to heal as many wounded people as possible. Goboru scowled as Gobdi called him Big Brother. And then Goboru asks Hobsei that it's time to explain his form. Hobsei says he was waiting for him to ask. Goboru realized that Hobsei had also evolved that morning when he woke up. She had become part of the lineage of the lords. It looks like a half-lord sorceress, but lords shouldn't have those marks. They are similar to the ones Goboru had on his body. When suddenly Hobsei punches Goboru in the abdomen, asking why he was standing there. She was bursting with energy, and I wanted to test how much better she had become. We then see Hobsei dispersing several fireballs and setting the forest on fire. She boasts that she has plenty of energy and could throw 20 more times, but Goboru says there's no need, it was more than enough, and thanks her for the demonstration. Goboru thinks that the skills are a little inferior to the real thing, but Hobsei will certainly become a true sorceress lord next time. And Goboru gives Hobsei new equipment to celebrate her progress. Goboru thinks that he was the reason for the rapid development of the village. Goboru had a theory. The evolution of goblins begins after about a month of life, depending on the conditions in which they grow up. In any case, Goboru should be happy with every new colleague who develops, but there are also some who haven't grown in that good environment. We arrived on the 52nd day. Gubkichi and Goboru hunted a tricorn, and Goboru told Gubkichi that they would eat well that night. When they arrive at the village, Goboru comes across some goblins saying that they have decided to leave because they have worked hard for something in life, and the younger goblins are leaving them behind. Goboru says it's fine, and they don't understand. But Goboru explains that they took their own equipment, so there was no reason to stop them. Goboru gives her a parting gift, a knife made of mithril, a magical metal. And then the goblins leave. We have reached the 53rd day. As Goboru walked through the forest, he saw an orc carrying a human who was already dead. Then Goboru attacks the orc from behind because he believes that the human has a peculiar ability. And then he learns the monster taming skill. And in the night, he goes to the alchemist, who tells him to listen and contain his surprise. She had managed to prepare something that he really wanted to drink. Goboru drinks it and tastes the alcohol and is very happy and grateful. We've reached the 54th day. The goblins of his parents' generation left the village, and if anyone preferred to go too, they just had to raise their hand. Goboru wouldn't stop anyone, and they would even receive a farewell gift from him. No one raised their hands, so he told everyone to drink a toast. We've reached the 55th day. After that, things went more smoothly. Goboru made ear cuffs that contained his blood, the aim being for them to serve as transmitters. We arrived on the 56th day. They were testing the ear cuffs, and seeing that it worked, he had to produce more. We arrived on the 57th day. Gobu was attacking a tricorn. Goboru saw that the horse was unharmed and used the monster tamer. For him, it was a fine choice to be the first familiar. As well as a tricorn, he also captured a brown bear to be familiar with, and also the leader of the Black Wolf Pack was his pet, who will serve as a bodyguard for the humans. On the 50th day, something happened that surprised him. The redhead who trained as a warrior had never stood out when suddenly she turned the page. Goboru had arranged everything for her to fight with. Just one at a time, she killed 3 kobolds with her bare hands. Goboru is eating some meat, and the redhead asks if she can have some. He said it was fine and handed it to her. She sniffs and doesn't eat, saying that she seems to have found a new occupation. She runs after a red deer and tells Goboru that she can even get to that kind of prey. Gobdi then tells Goboru that that day another goblin had been attacked by humans and fled home. Goboru understands that things are beginning to happen, the great war between humans and elves. We've reached day 6. Goboru wakes up, realizing that the kobolds are fleeing, but he doesn't know who is after them. It was too dark. Even with Goboru's perception, he can no longer tell them apart. He sets off with his soldiers in search of the kobolds. The question was who came next after the kobolds. When Goboru came across magical creatures, they were skeleton warriors. Goboru's archers attack, but to no avail. Goboru detected something large behind the hordes of skeleton warriors. It could be the source that creates the skeleton warriors. Goboru punches a skeleton warrior, breaking his skull completely. And then he tells his soldiers to attack with blows and not weapons, so they all start fighting. He told everyone to smash the skeleton warriors as it was a great opportunity to gain experience points. Then he said he would take care of the rest, ordering his people to retreat. Goboru said he could do it in 10 seconds. Goboru picks up his red spear and goes around beating up everyone, and with one blow he manages to break 5 skeletons in one fell swoop. He only counted 3 seconds. It was faster than he thought. He takes the skull of one of the skeleton warriors and gains the undead creation skill, superior armor and magic absorption, light damage control, light magic damage control. The kobolds bow down, thanking Goboru for saving them. He remembers that the kobolds had accidentally unearthed Velvet's treasure that they had buried. As a result, his guardian, the great skeleton soldier, awoke. To escape the advance of the skeleton warriors, they risked fleeing to the cave where the evil and dark ogre lives. Goboru doesn't understand why they call him an honorable lord, even though he and his people had killed several kobolds. The kobolds were aware, but they knew that they were only still alive thanks to Goboru's help. Goboru didn't understand because another gang always came along to join him. Our episode kicks off on the 61st day after a long while, with Goboru out hunting alongside Gubkichi. Suddenly, they spot 12 armed human soldiers. Goboru tells Gubkichi they're changing course to follow them. They track these humans down to the edge of a road and discover they're there to kidnap the elf chief's daughter. It seems they plan to attack them on their way back from some festival. Oh, by the way, if you're watching the video and haven't subscribed yet, please do so you won't miss updates. Goboru also finds out someone among the elves leaked the information. About 2 hours after the sun starts to set, the elves are on their way. Goboru watches from afar, and he spots the chief's daughter. Elves are usually attractive, but to Goboru, the chief's daughter is a cut above. Then, all the elven soldiers are attacked, and just as they're about to take the chief's daughter, Goboru decides to step in. He ties up all the humans at once and carries the girl. While Gubkichi hauls the humans, he even asks if they're heavy, and Gubkichi says no. Goboru looks at all the dead elves on the ground and says he'll pray for them to rest in peace. Then we jump to the 62nd day. As for the 12 humans they captured, it seems they were planning to launch an attack in 20 days. Goboru devours all 12 humans to gain their abilities, leaving no leftovers. He gains skills like condition assessment, contribution, trap unlocking, trap sense, enemy sense, enhanced assassination, hidden weapon mastery, human destruction, vorpal strike, aura cut, backstab, needle shot, resistance to severe pain, resistance to seduction, and resistance to assassination. Next, the chief's daughter wakes up, and Gobaru waits for her to do so. Upon waking, she screams in fear at Gobaru. Noticing she has wings, unlike the other elves, she asks where she is and what happened to her guards. Gobaru tells her to calm down, and she thinks he's going to do something bad to her. After a while, she manages to calm down and apologizes to Gobaru for losing her composure. She drinks a medicinal tea made by the alchemist with analgesic effects. When the time is right, Gobaru tells the elf girl everything. She asks if there was really no way to save the others since he stayed quiet and let it happen, calling him really mean. Then Gobaru says the human-elf feud isn't the goblin's concern, and besides, there's a traitor among the elves. He suggests she might want to worry about that instead of freaking out at him. The elf girl starts crying, and Gobaru looks unsure of what to do. He tells her to rest for today, and that he'll send her home the next day. In the night, the old man sees a very beautiful elf in the village and asks if he can have a taste, but Gobaru tells him to stay far away. Gobkichi says Gobaru is no fun. While the elf girl sleeps, we reach the 63rd day, and Gobaru is about to leave the village to accompany the elf girl home. Gobkichi asks if there's an explanation for the wings on the elf girl's back. She explains that it's something only high elves have. Normally, they're hidden in their bodies. High elves are those who rise in rank and can fly with those wings. They're not meant to be shown to other people. But since the chief's daughter is inexperienced, they tend to pop out. After 3 hours of walking, Gobaru and Gobkichi arrive at the elf village, but aren't welcomed warmly. Several elves have their bows and arrows ready to attack. Using mithril arrows, ogres like Gobaru should be able to survive dozens of shots. The elf girl asks them to stop because they saved her life. The elves then lower their guard, and after a while, Gobaru and Gobkichi are allowed to enter the village. The elf girl reunites with her father and apologizes for worrying him. Her father says she doesn't need to apologize, and that he's happy she returned safely. Gobaru has the deep gratitude of the elf father for saving his daughter's life. Gobaru gets straight to the point, saying he didn't save the chief's daughter out of kindness. The elf chief asks his servant to bring the reward. Gobaru wants the elf chief to show what his children mean to him. It would be a good chance to understand his judgment. So, the elf chief presents the failknot, a magical item that's a treasure of their family. His daughter returned to him safely, and nothing is worth more than that. Gobaru apologizes for testing the elf chief, and to make up for it, he has some information that the elf chief might find useful. The chief asks what it is, and Gobaru mentions the movements of human forces as an example. The elf chief believes they'd make good friends. The elf chief gave a large amount of mithril, and in return, Gobaru provided them with spirit stone knives, magical items in the shape of spades. Sealing the agreement they had, the elf chief wants to ask Gobaru something and hopes he doesn't mind. A group of his elite warriors has been missing for almost 20 days, and he asks if Gobaru knows anything, but Gobaru denies it. On their way back, the elves brought farewell gifts for Gobaru and Gobkichi, medicines and fine drinks made in that village. The old man hopes Gobaru likes them. Gobaru says if he ever needs help, he can call the goblins and he'll get a friend discount. Then they head back to the village, and they're trying out the elves' drink, amazed at how delicious it is. That was another reason to get along with the elf chief. We reach the 64th day. Gobaru tries to wake up Gobmi, as it's already morning. Then he notices that Gobmi evolved into a Dampier variant overnight. But it wasn't just her, there were also 8 hobgoblins. Gobaru asks Gobmi not to take off those glasses unless she's near an enemy, and she understands. According to Gobmi, the blessing of the ice god gave her the ability to create and manipulate large amounts of ice. The evil eyes she had could seduce enemies into fighting each other, and the weakness she would have in relation to sunlight is compensated by the blessing she received. But Gobaru found her appearance familiar to him for some reason, and Gobmi asks if something is wrong. Gobaru says no. He's just impressed with her appearance. However, Gobu also evolved into a half-Earth Lord. The Earth Lord has the ability to manipulate the ground, identify weak points in the bedrock with geological assessment, has a skill that strengthens the body, and lightning magic that allows detecting jewels, and Hubsato also evolved into a half-bloody lord. Her characteristic was being able to control blood and turn it into weapons. Goboru wondered the places and forms were all different, but they all had tattoos similar to theirs, all saying they give some power, so he hoped to find out with time. Gobjai is shocked to see that they all evolved again. It seems they will all need new names, then Hobsei will be called Witchsei, Gobmi will be Dombi, Hobsato is now Bloodsato, and Habu is now Terry, Gobkichi will be Ogrekichi, and Gobdi will be Hobdi. But for Goboru, all that mattered was that they could differentiate themselves. And that's how things stood in terms of the power of the different races, with Goboru's village being superior. Once the human war began, the elves would turn to the goblins for help, and the more strength Goboru had, the more tactical options he would have. With that, he distributed a new set of communication ear cuffs, but the elf women couldn't wear them. It's a big taboo for elves to decorate or disfigure their ears, and Goboru saw no other choice. He spent a good amount of time breaking the elf women's pride. With the new kobolds and elves now wearing the ear cuffs, there was a significant increase in contingent in the training that day. Later, they had practical combat training. The opponents were skeletons that Goboru had created, with the creation of inferior undead he had acquired the other day. They come with dark bones instead of white ones and heavy equipment. The more armor a skeleton has, the higher its quality. Even the elves, with mithril weapons, were effective against undead, almost couldn't win, but it seemed like the losers accepted the result. Goboru saw that building trust naturally really worked well. We reached the 65th day. If Goboru used less mana, he could create normal skeletons, zombies, and other undead. He wanted to taste them. But the lack of physical form prevented ghosts from being devoured. Undead were good opponents to practice against and gain experience, but they are purified in just a few tens of seconds in daylight. For Goboru, it was annoying not being able to use them during the day. Goboru was focused on training the kobolds and the elves. After all, the village was growing a lot, and the kobolds were in a very low position. The only way was to work hard to get stronger. We reached the 66th day. Goboru had gone to the caves where the kobolds lived. After grabbing his belongings, he asked Terry to take control, and also, he had the kobolds practice group hunting. The idea was to increase the number of black wolf familiars. But they moved better than Goboru expected, managing to capture 20 individuals. He believed the wolves could be useful as familiars, and also, they made a wild boar stew at night. The blacksmith showed Goboru the axe he had damaged in the fight against the red bear in renewed form. The axe had received several improvements as the blacksmith modified almost everything. Now it had a spirit stone, iron, and mithril alloy. The blacksmith had worked hard on it. Goboru was impressed. Upon gaining experience with handling spiritual stone, the blacksmith became an elemental blacksmith. We hit day 67, and guess what? It was another hunting day for the kobolds. Goboru was out there hunting boars. Meanwhile, Gobkichi, with all his love-struck bravery, confessed his crush on Terry to Goboru, who promised to be his wingman. "Tonight's the night," Goboru said with a grin, leaving poor Gobkichi a jittery mess. And so, Gobkichi poured his heart out to Terry, and guess what? Smooth sailing. Fast forward to day 68, Gobkichi and Goboru were sparring. Gobkichi, feeling as light as a feather and strong as a bull, landed quite a few punches on Goboru. But here's the kicker. Terry had a chat with Dombi about Gobkichi beforehand, so Dombi and Goboru set the stage for them. Goboru noticed Gobkichi was brimming with so much energy that he had to call in a black skeleton to finish the fight. After training, the gang went out hunting. Goboru devoured some weird insect monsters and unlocked a bunch of new skills. Feeling adventurous, he decided to try out an exoskeleton. He ended up looking like one of those superheroes when they suit up. The exoskeleton was tough as nails, but Goboru missed his old threads, made from the skin of a red bear. Turns out, they were used to make the exoskeleton. Bummer. He also discovered he could switch between 4 additional forms for aerial and aquatic battles. Goboru even tried out a skill that let him sprout wings and take to the skies, but it wasn't as graceful as he hoped. Later, they feasted on boar meat, and it was a jolly good time. Day 69 rolled in, and Goboru noticed it had been ages since it rained. Lo and behold, it started pouring. He decided to tinker with some stuff. He helped the redhead with her training, sweated buckets, then swung by the blacksmiths. She was tinkering with a repeater crossbow. Things were going so well that Goboru ordered a batch of them and threw in some extra materials. The blacksmith promised to take care of it. Later that day, Goboru assisted the sister chefs with dinner. They'd become head chefs. After dinner, he challenged them to recreate dishes from his past life. They'd never heard of them but found the idea intriguing. Afterward, Goboru teamed up with the alchemist to discuss making magical items. The alchemist mentioned that the bones from the black skeleton were proving quite handy, as they made a bone spike that could freeze targets on the spot. Day 70 arrived, and there were elves at the cave entrance. They came to deliver some news. The human army was marching through Kyudal Forest, and the elves needed Goboru's help. Goboru agreed and handed them a magic item to communicate with the elf chief. As they left, Goboru gathered everyone in the village and declared them a mercenary group, and guess what he named them? Parabellum. Our tale begins on the 71st day, when the Globins were galloping frantically on their mounts. Goboru recalls the elf warning him that the human army was encroaching upon Kyudal Forest, and he remembers that breaking the pact would render it null and void. Grateful for the heads up, Goboru humbly accepts the job, but insists they have the freedom to act. It was the moment for their first big gig as mercenaries, and Goboru and his crew were ready to roll. Goboru had 36 main members and their kin who could sneak around thanks to the witch's magic. He'd gathered a total of 73 members to strike at the crack of dawn. They kicked off their operation bright and early because Goboru's clones, scouting ahead, stumbled upon the human army camp the day before. Arriving at the scene, they found a magical barrier preventing monsters weaker than the user from invading. Their mission: smash that barrier pronto. Goboru orders them to surround it. Ensuring everyone's in position, he boosts his Gi-Durg with some elemental resonance from his silver arm to break the barrier with a single shot. And he boosts your finger to you. Subscribe in the channel to not lost the updates. The humans are left scratching their heads as Terry unleashes a massive attack, raising mountains around them. Goboru explains that in that confined space, Dombi and the witch launched a simultaneous magic assault, while he, summoned hordes of skeleton warriors and hurled spears left and right to thin out the common soldiers. But he knew that wouldn't be enough to bring them down. As his skeletons start getting neutralized one by one, a blonde swordswoman strides forth, and Goboru, thinking she's the knight in charge, decides to ironically greet the gang with a mighty blast. Then he calls forth his skeletal warriors once more. The blonde knight asserts that there's no doubt the ogre is leading the undead army. She urges her allied soldiers to take down Goboru. Meanwhile, the skeleton warriors advance, only to be met with a human mage's spell, neutralizing several of them. Then he casts a spell to boost his allies' speed. Goboru realizes it's a speed buff and acknowledges the commander's strategic prowess. Her magical power isn't half bad either. He also realizes that targeting her heart isn't a bad idea, just as she's attempting to strike him, so he sends her flying far away, causing one of her allies to try and catch her, but they both end up hitting the dirt. Goboru reckons she could be useful to him and declares he'll spare their lives, but she retorts, saying she'll shut him up herself. She's hell-bent on taking Goboru's life. However, he kinda digs her feisty spirit. He realizes she's a lot more than he gave her credit for. She tells him to shut up again and challenges him to show his strength. If he defeats her, she'll accept whatever comes next. Goboru ponders. A knight, a mage, a priestess, and a swordswoman with a flaming sword. He wants to capture those 4 alive. As for the rest, they'd leave that up to the others to decide whether to kill or to snack. If she didn't want to lose, she better go all out. The next few minutes can hardly be called a fight. It was more of a one-sided humiliation. Kubkichi casually knocks down 4 soldiers at once, while Dombi casts a spell that makes the humans do her bidding, causing them to turn on each other. Dombi manages to spark a massive brawl because the soldiers were eager to please her. And that was the biggest problem. It was her first time using the spell called Seductive Evil Eye. And even she was a bit scared. Bloodsato turns the human soldiers' blood into swords to attack each other. And Terry seems to be having a blast, unleashing a mighty attack that knocks down several soldiers. In the end, none of Goburu's allies end up getting hurt, while they completely wreck the enemies. The knight's sword lands a hit on Goburu, but it doesn't do much damage. Still, he's impressed. She fights pretty darn well, until the human mage summons the Weiss Flame Drashan Dragon. For Gobse, it'd be tough for Goburu to withstand a direct attack from a level 5 magic creature. He sees that the knight is ready to sacrifice herself, but the mage admits he can't control the dragon and apologizes. So, Goburu grabs the girl, claiming victory, and declares he won't let her die there. She just stares at him without saying a word as he takes the brunt of the dragon's attack on his back. Gobse realizes he's enduring it with a triple-layer magical shield level 3 magical conclusion shield, an atmospheric manipulation vacuum layer, plus a high-pressure water shield from his hydraulic hand. The dragon couldn't harm him, though it seemed pretty intense. And that's how they win the battle. Plus, Goburu scores by taking talented warriors like them as prisoners. The blonde girl finds it unbelievable. Goburu figures since he's been merciful by not killing them, they'll have to work pretty hard for him. He tells everyone to gear up to leave and gains new abilities: Brave Heart, Trip, Army Control, and Speed Reading. Plus new occupations like Commander, Heavy Swordsman, Minstrel, Strategist, Lancer, Slave, Farmer, Monk, Heavy Warrior, and Light Warrior. He also gains skills like Forging, Evasion Boost, Great Circulating Cut, Cross Cut, and Iron Spirit, Light Spirit, Unilateral Justice, Unwavering Faith, Misconception, Connected Soul. Then Goburu heads over to the elf chief and asks if he's lounging around too much for a village leader. They toast, and the elf chief thanks Goburu for stopping the human army invasion, explaining he came to play with Goburu out of gratitude. Goburu's chuffed. It's all for gratitude after all, so he accepts. Goburu decides to check on the humans, as per usual, to see how many days they'd last. Turns out, the drug works faster on humans than elves because, well, they're more instinctual. The 72nd day rolls in, and thanks to the ear cuffs, the humans couldn't lie or hide anything. So Goburu scoops up loads of intel, but of course, he's not keeping it all to himself. He's gonna pass it on to the elf chief. He remembers the elf chief asking him to share prisoner info, because relying solely on Goburu wouldn't be great for morale. Obviously, there's a reward involved: 10 barrels of that elf booze. Goburu's pumped about the offer. He couldn't resist the elf drink cause it's just too good, so he spills the beans. The captured humans spilled the beans about their main troop route. The humans planned to use their forces to approach from various directions simultaneously. Dividing the forces wouldn't be wise, but the trails are narrow in Kudal Forest. They probably didn't have much choice. The elf chief praises Goburu for living up to his name, and his daughter asks about that spell called Hello. The 73rd day arrives, and it's time for Goburu and his crew to follow the invasion route ahead of the main troop. They set up various traps and then hide in trenches, led by a knight in iron armor. The army marches in sync with about 500 men, including roughly 100 heavily armed wizards. If the elves were to face them head-on, it'd be a tough battle. But for Goburu and his mercenary squad, it's a piece of cake. They're well prepared. The goblins start knocking down trees to block the humans' path, and then start hurling rocks enchanted with spells, equally squashing those who flee and those who resist. In no time, only 300 of the 500 men are left. The long-range squad called Regret takes care of the rest with continuous shots. The soldiers who manage to dodge have to deal with goblins hidden in the trenches around them. The enemies are swiftly reduced to less than 100, but one soldier suggests they all still alive should band together and form a barrier, so they do just that, and the knight orders them to pile up whatever they can, whether it's shields or corpses. Gabaru admires the knight's competence. Meanwhile, the regret squad keeps shooting at those soldiers. Gabaru sees they've hit a stalemate and need to change tactics. He sends Gobkichi to nab their commander alive. The human soldiers start shooting because they don't want them getting closer, but Gobkichi's got a shield and deflects the shots. There were 3 of Gabaru's mercenaries for every enemy. The human soldiers didn't stand a chance. Gobkichi approaches the soldiers until a red-haired soldier asks him if they don't know how to fight normally. Gobkichi replies that the humans' usual way is boring, and they start battling. Gabaru realizes the guy would make a good servant, so Gobkichi takes out all the soldiers, grabs the commander without killing him, and hoists him over his shoulder. Gabaru thinks the outcome's excellent and reports everything to the elf chief before preparing to leave, and of course, he gains some new skills from that battle. The 74th day arrives, and there are several human soldiers who were captured. They complain that Gabaru spared their lives and left them in that hole. But the commander tells them to quit thinking like that. They're lucky to have food and a place to sleep. So, Gabaru orders them to spill the beans on why the humans were attacking the elves' kingdom. It all started with the princess of the human kingdom of Sternbert. She caught this weird, 99% fatal disease. She was about to marry the heir to the throne of the neighboring Kilika Empire. The king demanded a cure be found, and after the whole kingdom put in effort, they found what they were looking for. A miraculous cure in the hands of the elves deep in Kudal Forest, blessed by the forest demigod. In short, human greed sparked that war. Humans seemed to be a species that only caused trouble, and Gabaru felt it because he used to be one. While Terry was scouting for elements, she stumbled upon something that released a lot of thermal water. To be precise, Gabaru tells everyone to explore it because it has a bunch of benefits like having a hot water bath. The 75th day rolls in. Gabaru gets the idea to use those prisoners for new training to allow others besides himself to improve their leadership skills. Basically, they had a kind of simulation using a real army. So, all the goblins from Gabaru's village join in the training. The commander's tired of skeleton warriors and asks if he can spar with Gabaru. Gabaru thinks he's pretty brave and accepts. They start fighting, but Gabaru quickly defeats the human. Then Gobkichi asks to fight the man too. After that fight, they all decide to have a meal. The commander sits across from Gabaru and says he's from an area where many mixed races live, which is why he gets along better with him than with nobles. He doesn't understand why nobles act negatively toward mixed races. Gabaru gets what he's saying. The commander tells Gabaru he doesn't want to fight for the Imperial Knights anymore. He wants to fight under Gabaru's orders, so Gabaru releases him and says he's now the master of the red-haired girl. The 77th day comes and Gabaru hands over some of the captured humans to the elf chief because they're not improving and there are still too many left at the base. They've become a burden, so the elf chief accepts then. Gabaru asks him to explain about the option of the legendary miraculous cure that the humans wanted so badly. The elf chief explains that he'd offered that option to Gabaru before, but didn't ask for the details. It seemed potent enough to cure almost any disease. Gabaru doesn't understand why he'd given it to him, but the elf chief says their law only prohibits giving it to humans, but an ogre who saved his daughter wouldn't be a problem. Gabaru drinks the potion and gains the abilities of quick regeneration and secret blood potion. He manages to cure a guy with just a drop of his blood and starts to worry about it, but he also feels his powers reaching extreme proportions. Our episode kicks off on the 81st day, just a few days after the second clash with the human army. Gabaru and his band of merry mercenaries were itching for another brawl. Gabaru, ever the multitasker, managed to spear a human soldier who was innocently sipping his morning coffee. The humans, understandably confused, gawked as the spear suddenly sprang back to life and started attacking everyone in sight. Tzemps, our resident weapon wizard, could summon an infinite number of spears within a 100-meter radius from the point of impact. The battle lasted about 20 minutes from the first caffeine-disrupting strike. Gobburu then deployed a special skill, dunking all the soldiers into a vat of green goo. Terra, ever the critic, found the sight rather unpleasant, while Sato seemed to be having the time of her life. Sei, on the other hand, was convinced Sato was a few screws short, and decided it was best to just ignore her antics. By day 82, the human women from Gobburu's village paid a visit to the elf village. The elves, not quite used to such attention, were bewildered. One of the human women suggested that their presence might be causing a bit too much of a stir. Gobburu, ever the reassuring leader, told them not to fret, as the elf chief was much nicer than the other pointy-eared folks. Right on cue, the elf chief arrived, apologizing for his tardiness and brandishing a bottle and some glasses. Thanks to Gobburu's recent escapades, the human army was on the brink of extinction. The elf chief, seeing no benefit in dragging out the conflict, offered to send his best fighters to join forces with Gobburu for a decisive blow. Gobburu was on board with this plan after all. The customer is always right. After hashing out the strategy with the elf chief, Gobburu headed back to the village. En route, a blonde knightess expressed her gratitude and pledged her loyalty. Asking Gobburu for help to treat a disease afflicting her princess, she requested the elf's secret remedy, which got Gobburu thinking, if he could get the kingdom indebted to him, it might be handy in a pinch. However, he also considered the 5 powerful gods worshipped in their world, whose blessings often sparked religious conflicts. Gobburu had a blessing from a god of conclusion and origin, and introducing the remedy could ignite new problems. While riding with the redhead beside him, Gobburu decided to ponder the blonde knightess's request, thinking he might find a way to make it work. She thanked him, and then they reached day 83, gearing up for the final battle before dawn. The human headquarters had around 2,000 soldiers, maintaining tight security even at that hour. Gobburu's force, now bolstered by 500 elves, totaled 650 warriors. Gobburu knew that rushing into the fray would be their downfall. Moreover, one of Gobburu's clones had unearthed some juicy intel. The humans were sending the Rugled Order, and the elves' luck might run out. A former human army member with red hair confirmed that the arrival of heroes was bad news. The blonde knightess explained that the Rugled Order consisted of 8 heroic warriors, each blessed by the gods, making them a formidable fighting force. Their abilities not only made them powerful, but also enhanced the skills of those fighting alongside them. Gobburu, ever the optimist, saw this as an exciting challenge, wondering what these heroes might taste like. Gobburu then summoned a legion of his skeletal warriors and launched the first phase of their plan. Mai questioned the timing, as dawn was approaching, but Gobburu assured her that he had made special adjustments this time. He instructed Gubkichi and his team to ensure the perimeter was secure. Gubkichi reassured Gobburu that they had it covered. Mai, curious about Gobburu's next move, asked what he planned to do. Gobburu, with his skeleton warriors in tow, headed straight for the heart of the human camp. In the dark, the skeletal legion charged at the human army, sparking a fierce battle. As dawn broke, some skeletons began to vanish, but contrary to the humans' hopes, many remained resilient against the sunlight. The fight was far from over, and the remaining skeletons pressed on, much to the humans' dismay. Gobburu had his clones squished down into slime form and used them to coat his skeletal warriors. The humans, utterly baffled, stood there scratching their heads until Gobburu burst onto the scene, delivering a mighty blow that took out multiple soldiers at once. And the human soldiers, swords and shields at the ready, charged at him in a desperate attempt to regain control. The plan was simple. Once the enemy camp was in shambles, Gobburu's opposition would crumble. Meanwhile, a green-haired kid in the human camp was questioning the soldiers, convinced they still had time and wondering why they were stuck with such a menial task. Apologizing for disturbing his rest, one soldier assured him that with his heroics, victory was certain. The kid, doubting their chances, mused that maybe they would win, but not everyone was as powerful as him. This kid, Filippo, had seen Gobburu in action and was intrigued. As Gobburu's magic obliterated the soldiers, Filippo noticed a mount on the ground and felt a pang of hunger. He started munching away until Filippo interrupted, calling out to him, "Sorry to interrupt your meal, but if you're not too busy, how about a fight?" Filippo, identified by Gobburu as a hero of the Rugled Order, specifically the Bug Bones hero, looked pleased but also annoyed by the nickname. "Seriously, do I look like an actual insect to you?" Filippo grumbled, his eyes morphing into compound eyes, a gift from the demon insect god. "Are you the one who's been wiping out my soldiers?" Filippo asked, clearly miffed. "Thanks to you, my vacation got cancelled. You're a real pain. You know that?" Gobburu, finding Filippo's Filippo's childish attitude amusing, yet feeling the pressure of his power, thought this hero must be quite used to fighting. Filippo, suspecting Gobburu had a divine blessing, inquired which god he was favored by. Gobburu kept silent, prompting Filippo to reveal a handful of wriggling larvae. These little guys are called undero, a mix of my blessing and necromancy, he explained, tossing the larvae to the ground. The dead soldiers started moving again, and Gobburu realized they weren't ordinary zombies. They weren't affected by the sun. He suspected they were some kind of parasitic biological weapon. Filippo, grinning from ear to ear, asked if Gobburu now understood the difference between a hero and a great hero. Gobburu replied, acknowledging Filippo's individual strength and the number of allies he could empower. Filippo confirmed, adding that while great heroes were stronger alone, they could only enhance a few people. Heroes like him, however, could boost the power of many more allies. Watch this, Filippo declared as all the bodies exploded into swarms of insects. This is Undero Basrala, the legion of undead insects. The insects swarmed Gobburu, and Filippo, watching the chaos, found it amusing. But Gobburu, undeterred, attacked the insects. Much to Filippo's surprise, impressed by Gobburu's ability to dismantle his toys, Filippo decided to take direct control, using a special ability. Filippo tried to restrain Gobburu and let the insects attack, but Gobburu, even while being hit, managed to keep fighting back. Filippo was shocked. A normal ogre would have been dead by now, but Gobburu's recovery was astonishingly quick. Deciding it was time for a stronger move, Filippo summoned a gigantic centipede named Altaelm, his personal favorite. As the ground trembled, Mai, observing from a distance, mistook it for an earthquake. Altaelm struck Gobburu with full force, and Filippo introduced his creepy crawly companion with pride. He was so famous, they classified him as a natural disaster. The gigantic insect had Gobburu clamped in its jaws, its venom potent enough to drop an elephant. Filippo watched in disbelief as Gobburu still clung to life. Suddenly, Gobburu dropped his weapon. His mercenaries sensed he was in danger, but they had more enemies closing in. The insect tossed Gobburu near Filippo, who gave a smug farewell, ready to uncover which god blessed Gobburu. But, much to his surprise, Gobburu stood up and, with a swift gauntlet punch, forced Filippo to dodge. Filippo couldn't comprehend how Gobburu had recovered so quickly. Obviously, Gobburu wasn't about to spill his secrets. Filippo decided it was time to use his first secret weapon, but first he began to introduce himself. Gobburu, however, couldn't care less and attacked mid-sentence. Enraged, Filippo transformed, emitting a delicious aroma that made Gobburu think he'd be worth the effort to eat. Filippo marveled that Gobburu hadn't even undergone an epic awakening yet, and was already so powerful. Gobburu had no clue what he was talking about, and Filippo wasn't about to explain it, given how Gobburu had rudely ignored his introduction. Gobburu then activated his exoskeleton transformation. Now, they looked like two armored behemoths ready for a showdown. If you don't want to end up looking like Filippo here, subscribe to our channel and receive the divine blessing of eternal good looks. The two clashed in mid-air, while Gobburu's mercenaries finished off the remaining enemies on the ground. Mai sensed something was off. Filippo suggested they call it a day, but Gobburu wasn't having it. Filippo declared he'd escape at any cost, then shed his exoskeleton and bolted like a streaker at a sports event. Gobburu tried to chase him down, but Filippo's empty exoskeleton served as a decoy. Gobburu had to admit, the guy could really run. Meanwhile, Mai had been busy. While Gobburu fought Filippo, one of his stealthy clones snuck off into the forest. The clone overheard the human soldiers admitting their forces had been decimated. They informed the future king and commander that they had no desire to continue the war. The clone then handed over a vial of the much-needed elven remedy, urging them to take it to the sick princess immediately. With the remedy in hand, the soldiers saw no reason to continue dying for nothing. The king called for a messenger to inform their homeland that they had the elven cure. Gobburu thought about how, if he had killed the future king right there, the kingdom would have thrown everything they had into exterminating the elves. He wanted to avoid an all-out war. He couldn't afford to lose his people, the forest, his village, his allies, or the elf chief. With the battle over, something needed to be done. 30 members of his Parabellum mercenary group had fallen, and he was cremating their bodies. Some reacted with deep sorrow, but Gobburu felt no particular sadness. To him, there was no place for tears or regrets. Instead, he felt a renewed determination to cling to life with all his might.